and they were eager to see it. And I suspect even if they didn't have a photo of their presence at the manger, it was something they never forgot. They didn't really need a selfie to know that somehow God had acted in such a way that history itself would be changed. Not simply history in a general sense, but their personal history as well. Because once you have encountered the Christ, it has an impact and an effect on not only the world itself, but most especially on each one of us. So the wise men came. They were following a star. They probably had been studying the heavens and looking for some kind of an omen for something that might have been unbelievably wonderful about to happen. And we know they traveled quite a ways to get to the manger. But they brought gifts anticipating that whatever it was that was going to happen, it would be worthy of presenting their best. And is that not also true for us? Even if we aren't there at the manger specifically, when the Christ is born, it encourages each one of us to present our very best. Because it does change us when we realize that in Jesus Christ, God was acting in such a way to send to this world a message of his continuing commitment to the creation itself, but to each one of us who are a part of that creation. I don't think we think very much about being creatures. We do think a lot about lording it over and being in charge and running the show, but we don't think of ourselves so much as a part of something. And it's important for us to kind of stop sometimes and step back and say to ourselves, I was created by God, just as everything else around me was created by God. And it was an expression of God's love. It was an expression of God's desire to be in harmony with something called fellowship with God, to be on the same plane with God. I think about Jesus coming to the River Jordan and being baptized by John the Baptist, and as he comes out of the water, hearing this voice that says he is God's beloved Son. But friends, Jesus is not the only person who is beloved by God. It could just as well have been anybody who receives the Christ into his or her heart. You are loved by God. You are God's beloved creation, God's beloved child, male and female. Because that's the way God did it when creation first occurred. He created us to be in fellowship. And so it is that not only is Jesus Christ a beloved child of God, but each and every one of us are beloved children of God. And God's intent for us at any time of life is only for that which is good and enhances our lives and brings us the kind of encouragement and hope that allows us to move into the day's events and activities with a real sense that God is with us. We are not alone. And so it was that when Jesus came out of those waters and went into the wilderness, he was discerning what God's purpose and will was for his life. Is that not about our spiritual journeys as well? When we begin to realize that we are beloved by God, sometimes we need to take a moment to reflect. What does it mean to be so loved by God that you are eternally in his care and in his keeping? Does it not mean that sometimes we need to reflect on what God's purpose for our life is? Certainly, as I came into an awareness that God loved me unconditionally, it caused me to stop and reflect as a teenager, for example. What was God's purpose for my life? Where was this all leading? And how would it unfold? You know, when I graduated from college, I was broke. And I needed to get some money together before I could go on to seminary. And I remember some of my college professors saying, I don't care what you do, but don't do something other than go to seminary, because if you do anything else, you'll never, ever get back to where you think God is leading you. Well, I took a temporary teaching certificate and began to teach school, which I loved. I loved teaching school. But I never forgot that God was leading me in a certain path. And so at the end of 2 years, we packed everything into a trailer and drove from Iowa to New York State. Because I knew. And I can imagine Jesus going into this wilderness time and beginning to reflect on how it was that he was going to live out what it meant to be a beloved child of God. And when he came out of that wilderness time, he had a sense of focus, a sense of direction and purpose from which he did not veer even once. And so he began his ministry, and it was a short one. History tells us it was only about 3 years before he actually went to Jerusalem, was crucified, and the resurrection occurred. So it's not necessarily, friends, a matter of time. It's a matter of intent and purpose. When we realize we are beloved by God, the Spirit of the living God will somehow make clear what our purpose might be in this world. But we all need to know that we are beloved. And it does somehow change our lives. It's why we celebrate a season of the year called Christmastide, because the momentum of Christmas is not meant to stop. It's meant to start us on a journey that never ends. Christmastide may be a few weeks in the church calendar, but in terms of how we understand what God is doing for us in Jesus Christ, it continues to unfold all the days of our lives. A tide sweeps us somehow into the future. And that's what Christmas is meant to do. It's not meant to simply be a day. It's meant to be an experience that somehow transforms and changes us in a way that makes our lives full, that makes our lives begin to realize that we all have a purpose, a beloved son, a beloved daughter, a beloved child of God. Now, it doesn't have to be as dramatic as the life and ministry of Jesus. That's not what I'm saying this morning. But what I am saying is that each one of us, as beloved children of God, have opportunities every day to let this tide of Christmas sweep us into new life, to sweep us into new ways of relationships, to sweep us into new possibilities. And that's exactly what this is meant to do. And so we need to be open to that, because that's how God is at work in this world through the birth, the life, and ministry of Jesus Christ. You know, I'm an advocate of the incarnation. That's a big religious word. It simply means the Word made flesh and dwelling among us. And I have said many times to congregations that any time we are in harmony with the Spirit of God and we realize we are beloved children of God, we become expressions of the Word made flesh dwelling in this world. The incarnation was not meant to be a one-time moment in the life of Jesus Christ. Because when God acts in us and through us, and we open ourselves to the possibilities, our flesh becomes the vehicle by which the Word is made evident in this world. You know, sometimes we don't realize the potential we have. Sometimes we step back, we make excuses, or we simply can't quite grasp the idea that somehow God is at work in and through each one of us. And for the betterment of the world and the betterment of the creation itself. The Word made flesh in us. I shared many years ago the memorial service at annual conference. And I suspect I have shared this with you as well. You know, some people don't even realize they're the Word made flesh. only in a moment, or the snapping of a finger, or the flash of an eye. But I remember reading in Newsweek magazine letters written home by servicemen to their families. And shortly after the letter had been written and sent, they were killed in Iraq or Afghanistan. And one letter in particular just struck me because it was written by a young soldier who was on one of these armored vehicles going down the road. And following that vehicle were children who had parched lips and were sweltering in unbelievable heat and humidity. And this soldier looked out and saw this little boy. And it was so gripping and compelling to him. They had been told by their superior officers not to do anything to help people along the road because they could actually get hit or run over by the vehicles as they were driving down the road. But you know what he did? He had in his possession a bottle, a plastic bottle of cold water. He threw it out to this child who caught it. I said when I read that article, this man in this moment was the Word made flesh and dwelling among us full of grace and truth. I'm sure he didn't think of himself in that way. He just was responding with compassion, which he could not absolutely deny himself or this child. But that's what I'm trying to say to us. When we are beloved children of God, those moments come to us, and when we embrace them or they embrace us, I don't care which way it happens, we become the Word made flesh, dwelling in grace and truth. Unbelievable that we have that potential. Unbelievable that we can make that kind of difference in this world. But it's true. And I think that's what it means when the Bible says, and Jesus is the first fruits. That is, Jesus is the one who God sent into the world to reveal to us our capacity to be the kind of disciples that have Christmas come to us in such a way that it transforms us and it transforms the world around us. I know, we don't often realize those moments when our flesh becomes the vehicle by which God speaks a word of hope or grace or love or forgiveness to the world around us. But I believe that's exactly what happens when we are swept by the tide of Christmas into a new way of life. The Word is made flesh and dwells among us full of grace and truth, not just in Jesus Christ, but in you and in me, when we realize the power of the Spirit of the living God to be at work in us and through us. What a gift to the world Jesus was. What a gift to the world each one of us is when we let the power of the Spirit of the living God work in us and through us. I wished, after I read that article, that I could talk with this young man. To say to him, you did the work of a loving God by simply throwing a bottle of water to a child. Isn't that what the Bible says? When I was thirsty, you gave me drink. When I was naked, you gave me clothes. When I was imprisoned, you visited me. And when I was sick, you came to me. Friends, that's incarnational stuff. That's the Word made flesh. And that doesn't happen unless the birth of Christ at Christmas sweeps us in this tide into our future. Let's never despair, because God is really working in us through